Hi, it's me, Andres. This is a sponsored video for Ducati Poland, but it might be more interesting than I initially thought. We're going to talk about the real costs of owning a Ducati Multistrada V4S and also those other versions as well. The idea was to compare it to other competing motorcycles, meaning the adventure touring segment. That's what I would call them. The most powerful, the biggest ones, capable of going the fastest, the farthest, and so on. And you know what? When I started talking here with various people, with different representatives from service centers, and they started talking among themselves, no, mine is cheaper to maintain. No, mine is cheaper to maintain. The only way to settle this would be to organize MMA fights between representatives of service centers or motorcycle dealerships of different brands, because it's so complicated that there's no way to wrap your head around it. Because here, a labor hour costs this much, but this procedure takes this much time, this many labor hours. That one takes that many labor hours. But with us, the checkups are more frequent. With us, the checkups are less frequent, but we have promotions, and they have different promotions. So we'll focus on Ducati, and now I'll try to present you with as many facts as possible about servicing these motorcycles, and you, knowing your own dealers and having your own experiences, will be able to find out, or rather judge for yourselves whether it's a lot or a little, whether it's worth it or not. The most important thing is that Ducati has changed. Ducati has changed over the past 10 or 15 years to the point that it's almost unrecognizable as a brand. Visually, of course, but technologically, as always, the most. But these motorcycles, well, actually the whole factory was reined in, that's the word, and forced to ensure that these motorcycles are, above all, consistently high quality so that their failure rate would drop significantly. But not just the failure rate, but also the simplicity of maintenance and the service intervals. To start with, a few words about the Multistrada V4 itself, because you've probably already read about it or seen it on our channels. What sets this motorcycle apart is, above all, the 170 horsepower V4 engine. The sensations when you accelerate this machine and cover long distances at high speeds are incredible. But for example, what I personally like about the Multistrada is, for instance, all the electronics in Ducati in general. They have always been at the highest level when it comes to performance. They are pioneers of many, many solutions, and the Multistrada probably offers the most options for personalizing all the electronics, but at the same time, it does it in such a way that it's quite easy because everything is visual with descriptions. And even though most of us won't use most of these adjustments, if we want to, we can easily access these settings for different maps that will fit us perfectly. Currently, the Multistrada comes in 4 versions and 1 special edition. So we have the V4S, the V4S Grand Tour, which some say is the best option in terms of value for money when it comes to equipment. The Rally, which turns out to be the most popular at the moment. Pikes Peak, my favorite, and soon to arrive in showrooms, is the Yeti, that is the Multistrada V4RS. It's called the Yeti because, as everyone says, hardly anyone has seen it. I saw it at Tikmater. Will be a few of these bikes, and all of them are probably already sold. So it's a sporty, almost race-ready version of the Multistrada. Let's move on to the facts. And the most important thing is that Ducati has extended the service intervals, and everything is transparent. You can find this information on the Ducati website. This is the maintenance transparency policy. And there you can see for each motorcycle what mileage or time interval and how many labor hours are required for servicing. The warranty on the Multistrada V4 is currently 4 years with no mileage limit. So you can easily check all of this yourself. As for the labor hour rate, you'll need to check that with your local dealer. So let me just use labor hours when talking about the subsequent services. But at the end, I also asked for a quote including materials. So I'll tell you at the end how much these individual repairs, or rather replacements, take and how much they cost. After purchasing the Multistrada V4, you have 6 months to ride 1,000 kilometers. If you reach 1,000 kilometers earlier, you come in for a service, which takes 1 labor hour. If you don't reach 1,000 kilometers, and yes, there are such cases. I know some personally, you still have to show up at the service center after 6 months anyway, and go through that 1 labor hour. The next service is after 1 year or 15,000 kilometers, whichever comes first. Every year we have an annual inspection, which means we check if the motorcycle is in good condition, if everything is okay, and this only takes about half an hour of labor. Then the question is, after that year, have you ridden 15,000 kilometers or not? Because 15,000 kilometers is the oil change interval, 15,000 kilometers or 2 years. It's a bit of a shock both for me and for many others. But I can understand it in the sense that I've attended many meetings and oil training sessions, and these oils are changing, technologies are advancing, and engine technology is improving as well when it comes to lubrication and oil management. Well, listen, someone is signing off on this and someone is providing a warranty for it. So even though I personally think about changing the oil every 15,000 kilometers or 2 years, I still think, wow. But if you think about a really long trip, like going to Morocco and here, you can compare it to the competition. If we're sure we can ride 15,000 kilometers on this motorcycle without a service, then we can really plan a long journey. If we only have a 10,000 kilometer service interval, then we can be almost certain that the service will come up somewhere along the way, and we'll have to deal with an oil change in Europe or in some other country on another continent. Let me pause for a moment on the topic of oils, because I've been thinking about Itari 15,000 kilometers in 2 years a lot, or not much. It depends on how you look at it. Recently, I came across a study showing that in Europe, 50% of users, that is, oil customers, pay attention to quality, performance, and so on. In Poland, it's 83%, so we are really quite technically fixated. But in this case, if you have the attitude that, okay, you understand that one product is good enough, or you trust the manufacturer, and on the other hand, you have a slightly more eco-friendly approach, which is popular in Europe. And honestly, I also try not to use things where I don't have to, then maybe it's actually a really good idea to change the oil less frequently, not more often, as long as we're sure that the oil is simply good for what it was designed for. I'm wondering how many years, whether you can press the rear seat heating button for 4 years, and if it won't break during those 4 years. No, just in case you ever want the motorcycle, I won't be pressing it anymore. Anyway, the major service for the Ducati Multistrada V4 is the valve adjustment, or rather the valve inspection, call it what you will. And now, please pay close attention. The Ducati Multistrada V4, precisely because it utilizes conventional springs and not a complex desmodromic valve system, requires this significant inspection at 60,000 kilometers. And that's a big deal, because I asked around a bit, and there aren't many Multistrada V4 owners in Poland who have actually reached that mileage and made it to the valve inspection at all. If you're one of them, then congratulations, you really rack up the miles on your motorcycle, but those are the facts. Once you hit that 60,000 kilometer mark, the valve inspection and adjustment takes 5.3 labor hours. I also recently asked for a specific quote on how much that would cost here in Warsaw. Besides that, the brake fluid and clutch fluid need to be replaced every 24 months. The motorcycle's fork oil, a vital component, should be meticulously changed after every 45,000 kilometers. The essential point is the specific prices I'm about to provide for these services, you will ultimately decide whether they're high or not. But the fundamental thing is, you truly have to ride a considerable amount on a motorcycle for these particular intervals and associated tasks to even become genuinely necessary. I'll have a cheat sheet. No, I just don't want to make any blunders, and I'm not great with numbers. Now, here are some sample facts. We have information from Ducati Poland that on average, a labor hour costs 400 zlotys gross, and here, you'll have to check for yourselves where it's more expensive, where it's cheaper, and so on, and then multiply it by what I mentioned earlier. We're in Warsaw at the Liberty Motors showroom, and I asked for a quote here for labor plus materials, just to be clear. And now, how much does a labor hour cost here? 500 something, you can check for yourselves. A labor hour here costs 534 zlotys gross. And so the first service, the break-in one, which is after 1,000 kilometers, or after half a year ideally, you should do those 1,000 kilometers, just a reminder together with the oil. So that's one labor hour and materials at 450 zlotys, which comes to 984 zlotys gross. The annual service is every 12 months. If you don't reach the mileage and the oil doesn't need to be changed, then you just come in, it's half a labor hour, which is 267 zlotys, and no materials, because there aren't any materials needed. The oil service, which means 1.5 labor hours and 450 zlotys for materials, so that's for the oil and filter. And here, the total comes to 1,250 zlotys gross. And now, call it what you will, if we go by the standard, such a checkup is every 15,000 kilometers or every 2 years. The service here, Ducati always calls it Desmo, but we know it's not a desmodromic timing system. It's simply an inspection and adjustment of the valve clearances every 60,000 kilometers. 5.3 labor hours plus materials on 1,198 zlotys for a total of 4,028 zlotys. It sounds like a lot, but at the same time, you've just bought a Ducati for around 150 grand, and you'll probably need to do 60,000 kilometers. So you'll also spend a bit on fuel, so I guess that's just what it costs. You decide for yourselves. Changing the brake and clutch fluid, 0.6 labor hours, 320 zlotys, plus the cost of the fluid. Well, I'm missing that here. But the fluid itself is just pocket change. What I was interested in was the suspension service, because I'm a fan of servicing suspensions. Sometimes I service the suspension on my motorcycles even a bit too often, but you know, it's just that kind of obsession wanting maximum grip and for everything to stick as well as possible. For these motorcycles, after 45,000 kilometers or every 4 years, as it turns out, it's 1.2 labor hours and materials cost 200 zlotys, 840 zlotys for servicing the front suspension. And here's a note. This is actually cheaper than in my Supermoto motorcycle. And you know, that one has all-in semi-active suspension and all that. The air filter together with the replacement costs 278 zlotys. The drive kit, which is probably quite important hour of labor, and the original parts cost 1,206 zlotys. You decide whether that's a lot or not. Personally, I like stock parts because I know they work, but if someone wants, they can probably go for non-stock ones. What I'm curious about is whether the warranty allows for a non-stock system, a non-original drive kit to be used. But then why bother complicating things? I don't know. Brake pads, front, for 2 discs, 0.4 labor hours. Brake pads, 889 zlotys, 1,100 zlotys. That's a lot, but that's because I'm used to how it was when I used to buy brake pads. I just used a lot of them. So I bought the cheapest ones, and they wore out quickly. And then one time, Darek told me that those nice racing Brembo pads, the 04 ones, cost something like 1,000 zlotys per disc. But the most important thing is that they brake well. Braking is safety. So 1,100 zlotys for changing the brake pads, and now you know how you brake and how many kilometers you drive. Well, you know, it's a individual matter, just like when it comes to changing tires. What kind of alarm is that at this hour? Excuse me, who is it? Me? Oh, that's your phone? Yeah. We forgive you. Brake pads, damn, 600 zlotys for the rear ones. If you have a Ducati, you pay 6,500 for the rear brake pads. There was a time when I could go through 2 sets of rear brake pads in a single day. While learning to ride on the rear wheel, I kept squeezing that brake lever all the time. The discs were burning, everything was red hot, and in the middle of the day, I had to replace the pads and put in new ones. Back then, I really enjoyed riding the Ducati. This was supposed to be a sponsored segment, so yeah. I'm sitting on my favorite one, the Pikes Peak, because I haven't ridden the RS yet, and that one will probably become my favorite. But let me know if this material was at all helpful, because honestly, it's not a bad idea for you to know roughly how much it will cost to maintain a motorcycle before you buy one. Share your opinions, and I'll think about whether or not to organize, you know, that freak MMA fight. Each representative puts forward their own service technician. That would be something, wouldn't it? And then we decide which motorcycle is the cheapest to maintain. But you should know that a lot has changed at Ducati. Fun fact, back in the day, to adjust the valves, the Ducati manual for those old models like the 1198 and so on, required you to remove the engine, take off the cylinder head, and adjust the valves with the head on the table. That's where all the complexity of servicing a Ducati came from. Now, the procedures are completely different, the motorcycles are completely different, and the technology is completely different. It's simply a totally different motorcycle now. But the philosophy has remained here. When it comes to performance, take care. Bye.